Hello and welcome to Salome's Writer Therapy, where you and your writing connect. In today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about the fourth key element of stories, which is setting. I'll show you how you can elevate your setting so that it's more than just places and people, but an integral part of your story. Also, check out the description for the free step-by-step guide on how to create your story setting. So, grab your favorite beverage and a cozy spot, and let's dive into today's episode. Alright, so first we're going to talk about what the setting of your story actually is. Is it the location of your story? The buildings, the streets, the cities? Is it the landscape of your story? The weather, plant and wildlife, terrain? Now, the short answer is yes. Location and landscape are both your setting. But the proper answer is yes and more. Let's look at it this way. If someone tells me they are writing a story set in a Victorian era England, the image in my mind does include the location and landscape, but that's still a general description, right? What if someone says their story is set in a modern day New York City or a wildlife reserve in Africa? What do you imagine? You see, it's more than just the location and landscape that makes these settings different from each other. So think about the civilization that lives in that setting, from their clothes and language to their cultures and government. Think of the time period the story is set in. All these things are part of your story setting, and it is also all of these things that makes the Victorian era England different from the modern day New York City or the African Reserve, or from that fantasy world set in the future. Now, if this seems a bit overwhelming, don't worry, I am going to talk about the different parts of setting in just a moment. But in short, in order for you to write an immersive and believable story, you do need to understand what its setting is. Now, before we talk about the different parts of the setting, I just quickly want to look at setting versus world building. A lot of people use these terms interchangeably, or say that world building is a part of setting, or setting is a part of world building. But that isn't actually true. World building is the tool you use to create your setting. Think about it this way. Would you say the act of writing equals a story? No, it's the words on the page, the scenes, the characters, settings, and plots that make up the story. And there's the key. World building is an action word, it's a verb. Setting, in this context at least, is an object word, a noun. You do world building to get your setting. Now, I don't want to start an argument about how you choose to use these terms, but I just want you to understand that, at least in my opinion, setting and world building are in fact different, and this is how I will be using these terms throughout the rest of the episode. Okay, so let's get back to setting, specifically the different parts of setting that you will use in your world building. Now, you get two main categories within setting: a physical setting and cultural setting. Now, the physical setting is all the things that would exist even if there weren't any sentient beings in your world. Meaning, if there weren't people or demons or angels or monsters or any kind of sentient being that you want to create. If those were not evident, then these things would still exist. Now, examples includes things like the weather, climate, different seasons, the terrain, locations or the map, time period, the astrology, the cosmology or the visuals of your world, the fauna and flora, and the magic system, etc. The cultural setting is all the things that would exist if there were sentient beings in your world. So if you have people or demons or angels or witches or creatures or monsters or whatever, then these things will be included under your cultural setting. Now, examples of these include languages, the religions, the government, the military, the economics, the races, the different gender roles, the food, the fashion, the rituals, social hierarchy, the history, etc. Now, these aren't exhaustive lists of different cultural and physical settings, it's just to give you an idea. So, if you look at these different aspects of setting, though, you will realize that it will take a very long time to create all of them in minute detail. The purpose is, after all, to get enough information so that you can write a believable and realistic story, not to get stuck in a world building loop for years and years, also called having world builder's disease. And there isn't a fantasy writer out there who has not suffered from world builder's disease at some point in their career, right? So the ultimate question is then, what is important so you can build just those aspects of setting? And unfortunately, the answer is different for every story and every writer. I know, right? What is the solution then? How can you determine what is important for your story so you don't spend those years on just world building? Now, here I would suggest that you look at the aspects of setting and choose a maximum of 3 in each category, which you will then create or develop in detail. So it will be 3 for physical setting and 3 for cultural setting. Now, some people will do a little bit more depending on their personal preference. You can go up to 5 of each, but you don't want to do too much that you get overwhelmed or lost in the world building. Now, to determine which aspects to develop, consider 2 things. First, consider the other key elements: conflict, character, and plot. And then secondly, your own interests or preferences. Okay, so let's talk about it a bit more. So in terms of the other key elements, you want to pay attention to the setting aspects that have a direct connection to the conflict, the character, and the plot. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick example of each of them so that you can see what I mean. So let's say that you've created a conflict in your story where your character has to travel through a swamp and fight alligators. You would have to create that setting piece, right? So the setting aspects that you might consider developing in this example is things like the terrain or the map or the fauna and flora, etc. Now, let's say that you created a character who serves in the military. Then you might consider developing the setting aspects of the military, the government, social hierarchy, etc. And now, what if you created a plot event where there's a battle between neighboring lands? Then you might need to develop the government, the terrain, the map, the military, the magic system, economics, etc. So take a look at your own story. Which aspects are connected to your conflict, character, and plot that you might have to develop in detail? Now, if you're unsure of this, I do have episodes on all of these key elements and they will be linked below. So I have an episode on conflict and character and plot that you can check out. Alright, so now that you have an idea of what aspects of the setting you might want to develop in detail that aligns with your key elements, think about your own interests and preferences. Meaning, which of the aspects just makes you excited or happy, or are things that you can spend hours talking about or researching? If you look at things like your Instagram feed or your Pinterest boards, those might give you kind of an indication about what I mean. But in most cases, you kind of already know, right? Because these are things you might want to include in your world building. Because at the end of the day, it should still be fun, right? That's why you will see some stories where one aspect or another is prevalent throughout the story, regardless of its importance to the other key element. Like, you know, those writers who always create these huge spreads whenever their character sits down for a meal, or they create a recipe book, or those stories where people's wardrobes are shown in explicit detail, or the stories where the entire history of the races or the religions are meticulously recorded. So think of the aspects that you as the writer would like to explore or develop in detail. And to make it a bit easier for you, there is space in the workbook linked below where you can make these lists of the aspects that you want to develop in detail. Okay, so now that you have the aspects of setting that you might need to develop for your key elements, as well as the list of aspects that you want to develop for yourself, see if there's an overlap or a pattern that emerges, and pick at maximum 6 from those, 3 for the physical setting and 3 for the cultural setting, that you will then develop in detail. Just a note that I want to add here is you will probably need to get a cursory knowledge of other aspects as well, but those you can figure out as you write or put them in the editing phase. Because remember, you want to get just enough information to write the story. So at this point, you will develop any other aspects beyond those 6 only once you need them. Remember, your story setting can either be a flat backdrop or it can be a rich and realistic environment. And if you're looking to create a story that pulls your reader into the very pages, then you want to make sure that your setting is connected to the conflict, the character, and the plot. It will bring your story to life. And don't forget to be true to who you are as a person when it comes to what world building you want to do or not. So that's it for today's episode. Remember to check out the free workbook in the description below so you can create your realistic setting. And if you found this episode helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell. And if you have a question or any future episode suggestions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. So, until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.